a design leader, an author, and a speaker. Our next speaker is a strategic advisor to BBC, Pearson, Tesco, and TCS in India. Please welcome Ben Sauer.
Hi everybody. Kudos to Pooja for going on after a magician, right? Okay. So, my name is Ben. I'm here to talk to you. Can I have the speaker notes up, please? I'm here to talk to you about design communication. And I've actually worked in India on and off for about 10 years, most recently as a design leader at Loop Health, a startup here in Bangalore. It's my third time in Bangalore this year. I guess I've been here often enough to know that when you're crossing a one-way road, you have to look both ways. So, I really need my speaker notes, guys, sorry. I want to start with a quote from a comedian I like. Neil Brennan. He said, "A good relationship is selfish." What did he mean by that? So, what he really meant was, and I can't read the quote to you because I don't have my presenter notes. He meant that we get confused about why we're in a relationship, okay? And actually, what it should really be about is wanting to be with that person. I'm not going on vacation with you. I'm going on vacation because I want to be with you all the time. And what I want to argue today is that that's actually a good analogy for design communication. We think design communication is for the people we are talking to. But actually, it's for us. Because how you talk about the thing shapes the thing. That's really what I mean today. Okay. I want to tell you about my favourite movie, Arrival. And I'm going to play you a scene which demonstrates a communication problem in a high-stakes situation. If you haven't seen this movie, there's this linguist, an expert linguist named Louise, and she is tasked with communicating with aliens for the very first time. And she goes into this spaceship, and at first she starts trying to talk with the aliens, but it doesn't quite work. And so then she starts writing with the aliens. And boom, they start writing back in their amazing script. Do watch the movie, it's got some great design details in it. So this is what happens next. She's making progress, but the military bosses, they are not happy. Here we go.
Everything you're doing here, I have to explain to a room full of men whose first and last question is... What is that?
In 1770, Captain James Cook's ship ran aground off the coast of Australia, and he led a party into the country, and they met the Aboriginal people. One of the sailors pointed at the animals that hop around and put their babies in their pouch, and he asked what they were, and the Aborigines said, kangaroo. It wasn't until later that they learned that kangaroo means, I don't understand.
I can sell that for now.
It's a good story.
Thanks. It's not true, but it proves my point.
So if you haven't seen this movie, do watch it. And my point in playing that clip really is that stories beat facts. She could have gone through the process of explaining why it's much easier to learn how to share writing than it is to learn how to speak. But that would have taken too long. With that little story she told that wasn't even true, he understood in moments. And so when we find the right words, when we find that perfect metaphor, it just unlocks understanding in a way that, the facts alone cannot. So I'm going to share a couple of examples to contrast this with you now. In the early days, Twitter was a chaotic startup that became accidentally successful. Okay, there we go. It's a plain version of that. This is what Mark Zuckerberg said, a clown car that fell into a gold mine. So the imagery in that second one is so much more compelling. It creates images in your mind, doesn't it? That mixture of disaster and success is much more clear. And I think my mission is to help you design, to communicate a bit less like this and a bit more like this. And I think our problem is that we thrive in details. We as designers, we love the details. That's where we go to by default. We want to explain everything. And my friend Jane Austen, no, not that one, she has this metaphor for when designers go on in too much detail. She calls it the real estate tour. So, who hasn't done some version of this, right? You open Figma, and you just start talking through the whole thing piece by piece. Me too, right? Put your hand up if you've ever done that. Yeah, a fair few people. So, oh, hang on, I've gone too far ahead here. So I just want to tell you about the home page. Listen, I know it's got too much stuff on it, but we've got to please all the departments, right? Don't look down here, it's just the footer. Contact us and support. Things users don't care about, right? So how do we tell clearer stories about our work? Well, it takes practice. Getting good at that clarity, you need to seek opportunities to be clearer every day, which is why I say, the title of my talk, practice your ABCCs, always be creating clarity. Most of these habits that I'm going to talk about today are from my book, more on that later. And I'm going to start with a couple of tips on how we structure things. So the first is outline horizontally. Oh, sorry, jumping ahead here. Outline horizontally. Okay, so why do I say that? Well, typically, when we outline, our tools push us towards a vertical orientation, don't they? If you think of Notion and, bullet points, right? But this kind of hides really, really important information from us. And when we outline horizontally, we actually get a much richer way of thinking about our communication and the story that we're telling. When we do it this way, not only do we have some constraint on our length, right, stops us going on too long, but we can also start to see the ups and the downs of our communication. And of course, this is very similar to an experience map. It's no accident. We should be crafting our communication in the same way that we craft our designs. So, that was first tip. Outline horizontally. Very simple tip. Next one on structure. Sorry, the clicker is slightly delayed here. Use strong story glue. Okay, why do I say that? Storytelling professionals are obsessed with the structure of things. Screenwriters want to know that one scene follows another with really good reason. But when we outline, we tend to focus on the stuff that makes up our message, right? The things, typically on Post-its for designers. The content itself. However, what goes in the middle? That's the story glue. Okay. We don't think about what's in between the content. So, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, they have this rule, right? It's a very simple storytelling rule. Weak stories use and then, and then, and then. However, strong stories use therefore, so, but, however, to form a cohesive whole. How they are connected really, really matters. That's what I mean by strong story glue. So I'll just show you a couple of examples from speaker and coach Jeff Gothelf. This is his real life story. I graduated, and then I joined the circus, and then I met the human cannibal, and then he told me how he got his job. Wish my life was as interesting as this. Stronger version. I graduated with no plan, so I joined the circus. Therefore, I met some crazy characters like the human cannibal, but his story was nothing like I imagined. So, see what I'm doing there? You can use this method to evaluate the strength of your story. Use therefore, so, but, however, not and then when you're outlining. Really simple trick, but promise you it really, really works. Okay, next one. Transcribe yourself. Seems kind of dumb, but okay. Let's see what happens here. I want you to think about the practice of improv. Now, I know that's maybe not a huge scene here in India, but I know comedy is really growing in Bangalore when I looked at the listings. So when you do improv, You learn about whether you're funny in nanoseconds. That laughter, that feedback is really, really immediate. But we talk to people all the time improvising, but we don't necessarily get as clear feedback, right? Do they really understand us? Not always as clear. If you think about showing your design to some stakeholders, you might get some nodding, you might get some confirmation, some good questions, but it's not super clear whether they're truly understanding. So one recommended alternative method is simply to transcribe yourself and make a habit of reading it afterwards. This helps you understand if you're really being clear and whether you need to kind of edit yourself in the moment. So the next time you're explaining a design, just open Google Docs, whatever tool you want that has a transcription tool, and try it out. This is basically a feedback loop, right? It creates a loop between the written word and what you're saying. And it's really, really useful. Comedians do this all the time. And of course, you can use AI tools to do this. This is one of my favorites, RambleFix. You just talk into it, and it gives you a clearer version of what you're trying to say. However, I don't recommend actually using in your written words what it gives you. I mean, yes, but edit it. Because the point is, you need to actually edit yourself, right? You need to get better. Use it as a feedback loop. Don't let it do the thinking for you. So, next one, give good headlines. Okay. Tanner Christiansen, this designer at Netflix, he said, when first designing something, getting caught up in the details is really easy. But once you try explaining what you're building, you have to kind of distill down what's essential and how everything fits together to make sense of it. Writing requires taking this kind of loose, complex set of ideas and boiling it down into short form. So if you always want to be creating clarity, spend more time than you think creating concise headline sentences about what you're working on or what you're trying to communicate. Perhaps much more time than you think on the work, right? Expand the amount of time you spend crafting the communication about the work. Take some time away from the work itself to craft the communication. And this really pays off because writing is the antidote to confusion. We think of writing as a separate thing from our thinking, but it's a kind of thinking. And when you write a really fantastic headline summary, people just understand you in nanoseconds. So let's have a look at the evolution of a headline. This is from my book. This is something I see a lot in a design presentation. Research finding number 1. Okay, nothing very interesting. Placeholder, but they often get left there. Next theme, allergies. Okay, you told me what the theme is, but we're not really saying anything about the issue here. Now, this version emerged after some writing and transcribing about the subject. Users with allergies face difficult life and death choices. Okay, we've really explained something about, in this case, how food ordering works for people with allergies. Now let's add a bit of poetry, alliteration, a metaphor. Allergic food choice is a life or death lottery. That is a much more compelling version of what we're trying to say. And the real truth here is, the reason you should do this is success is having stakeholders repeat your ideas back to you. Writing a really strong headline summary of what you're working on, it's not just for now, it has a compound effect. It perpetuates in your organization. People remember what you've said. It sticks in their head, and eventually the ideas will be repeated back to you. One last thing, headlines have patterns, and you can use them to create really good headlines. So just show you one quick one. This is from advertising. Parallelism. Really great pattern. Air is an air freshener. You can repeat a word and use a double meaning to use it twice. Really, really useful method. There's lots more of these. Do Google them. Okay, so spend a bit more time crafting great headlines. Around 7 to 10 words is a good measurement. Okay, collecting attention grabbers. So notice what I did at the beginning of this talk, right? I played you a scene from Arrival. And at first you're like, why is this guy talking about aliens? But I was setting you up for the themes that I'm covering now. This is an attention-grabbing story. So lots of movies actually do this. Sometimes you can essentially work out what is going to happen in the movie from that first scene alone. So I'll show you a couple of examples of this. megastar performs insane stunts, right? The Mission Impossible movies have now become a series of stunts, right? So from that first scene, and you know he's doing it for real, right? That's the crazy thing. You know exactly where this movie is going to go. And the funny thing about the way they write these is that the stunts are first. They write the plot of the movie afterwards. It's literally like Tom says, I want to rappel around the Burj Khalifa, and then they just have to make that happen. Right? So I want to give you a local example. Bahubali, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Bahubali? Yeah, maybe right. So at the beginning of this movie, a woman sacrifices herself to save a baby in a waterfall. And so this sets up the theme of the movie, right? Hero sacrifices everything for the future. So attention-grabbing stories, if you want to use these, they have a few qualities. They tend to be surprising, right? They wake us up. Wow, Tom Cruise is actually doing that. They're provocative, right? They'll tend to go like, there'll be some mystery. Like, why is what's happening? Who's chasing that woman? Why is she trying so hard, to sacrifice herself to save this baby? What's going on? We don't know. But the most important thing is thematic relevance. Yeah? That this sets up what you want to say, for example, in a presentation. So let me give you a more practical example, one we can use in work. Oh, going too far ahead. Let me tell you the story first. Sorry, this clicker. I don't know if I stand over here, this clicker will work better. Anybody know what this is? Walkman, right, yes. Yellow sports Walkman. So in the 1980s, Sony was selling millions of Walkmans, but they wanted to introduce new style and color to their product range. So they decided to run some focus groups. And they got people in and they showed them this new design. And people said, wow, this is amazing. I love this new yellow color. Like, it's way more interesting than my boring old black or blue Walkman. But here's the thing. The focus group was not actually the research. When the people left the session, they were offered a reward for attending. They got offered a black or a yellow Walkman. Which one did people walk away with? That's right. They walked away with the black one. So what are the themes in this story? Let's think about it now. Maybe I'll go stand over this side again. Story themes. Okay, so we have the value of user research. If you need to communicate to an organization how great user research is, this isn't a bad example. Experiment design, how to design a more effective experiment. The difference between what people say and do, I'm sure you will sense that one. You've got the answer right. And how to reduce risk. This could be telling a good story about how good product development works. Okay. So what we're doing there is we're connecting a useful story to a theme, and then we're finding out when we can use that story. And here's the thing. Traditionally, human cultures have relied on mythology and telling tales to teach lessons. There are indigenous groups who do not teach any direct lessons. They'll never tell you facts. They will always tell stories about things. And we kind of, in business, we've slightly lost this art. Okay. That was collecting attention grabbers. Moving on. Oh, just one last thing on that. Do you collect a list? You've heard a lot of these design innovation stories in your time in business, right? Have you got a list anywhere? Have you ever used them? Like, I keep a list now, and I think about the themes, and then I use these stories. Okay, mindful metaphors. So every language, every culture has terms for things that aren't really directly translatable, and they're often kind of signposts to something else. So here's a local one, maybe. Right. Char-siu-bis, am I getting that right? Char-siu-bis? Yeah. Now for the non-Hindi speakers, meaning a scammer, but what it literally means is a section of the Indian Penal Code. So we use a lot of these little signposts every day in our work. MVP, 0 to 1, the sprint. We don't think of them as metaphors or signposts, but they're all pointing towards a much more complex reality. And they really do control how we think and act. So the idea that metaphors control how we think and act comes from this book mostly, Metaphors We Live By. And what it proposes is that Humans navigate new things by referring to old things, right? By using metaphors. Even if it's wrong and even if it's old and inappropriate. That's the easy way, the more efficient way to understand things. And you can see this when new technology emerges. So this is an example of one of the early cars, the horsey horseless. Why does it have a horse's head stuck on the front? Who knows? What was the designer thinking? Well, they were mostly thinking about what existed already, right? That was their metaphor, that was their analogy. Now, you might be laughing at this example and say, we don't do that anymore. No. Lots of unimaginative AI metaphors. No shade on Pablo, I actually liked all the stuff he was doing there. But if you look in the media in particular, right, it's sexy robots. It's retrograde, it's sexist, it's backwards looking, and it's no one's experience of these things at all. It's kind of weirdly irrelevant. So this is what we do. We reach for metaphors and examples, and we mostly get it wrong. Now, really great innovators have a habit of creating really interesting new metaphors. So, obligatory Steve Jobs quote, "A computer is like a bicycle for the mind." Wow, what did he mean there? Well, he learned once that a bicycle is the most efficient mode of transport in the animal kingdom. You go the furthest for the least amount of calories, better than any other animal. And so this was his analogy for what computers should do. They should allow our minds to go much further with less energy. Now, there's an inverse to this, right, which is avoiding an unhelpful metaphor. Did you know that when they were creating Slack, Stuart Butterfield banned the word chat? Because he thought that if we used that word, or if they used that word, it would anchor them to old concepts, and they would create backwards-looking interfaces and backwards-looking experiences. So, how do you get better at using metaphors? You have to find these deeper, richer connections to link less obvious things, to really unlock understanding in the minds of the people you work with. So a few tips on this. The first is to notice the everyday world. You know, the Buddhists say we should pay more mindful attention in our lives. And there is inspiration everywhere for metaphors if you do this. I believe the Buddhist saying is you can maybe even see the true nature of things. I don't know if that's true, but how do we pay attention to the everyday world? I actually do this in workshops. We did it yesterday. That woman on the left is she went to a train station with a group and generated hundreds of metaphors for the idea of connection, right? This is a really easy thing to do. Just go somewhere with a lot of variety. Yesterday, we actually went to the mall next door. So another thing you can do is to improve existing metaphors. Here's just a small example of one I was thinking about. Think about a wizard interface, right? Well, it's step by step, so you could alternatively call it a staircase interface. And if it only has one field, maybe it's a gentle staircase. And if it has lots of fields on each screen, maybe it's a steep staircase. You see what I did there? So if you keep practicing this, you'll get better at making new metaphors for the work you're producing, and also recognizing when they're not working. Final thing, you can add vivid details. So in the UK, we have our equivalent of Shark Tank is called Dragon's Den, right? A pitch meeting. And I was thinking about this. I was like, what if a pitch is really easy? Well, I'm going to twist a couple of sayings now and say it's like stealing candy from a baby dragon if a pitch goes well, right? So just adding little details to existing metaphors and then kind of twisting them a little bit. These are the kinds of ways my brain works when I'm trying to explain things. So those are my tips on metaphors. Right.
So what are you going to...
This clicker. Excuse me a second.
So what are you going to...
Right. We saw with Louise at the beginning, right, that sometimes you need a story or a metaphor in the moment, right? You just need to come up with something that explains something. And one time I was in a strategy meeting with a startup, and the startup was proposing this like 10-year-long, really complex strategy. And when I was listening, parts of it were just making no sense to me at all. Like, it just wasn't working in my mind. And this scene from South Park popped into my head, and I'll just play it for you now.
So what are you going to do with all these underpants that you steal?
Collecting underpants is just phase 1. Phase 1, collect underpants.
So what's phase 2?
Hey, what's phase 2? Phase 1, we collect underpants. Yeah, but what about phase 2? Well, phase 3 is profit. Get it?
I don't get it.
You see, phase 1, collect underpants. Phase 2, phase 3, profit.
Okay, so the next time you hear a weak strategy, I'm going to make you think about underpants gnomes. Now, it might seem silly to kind of play that clip in a business meeting, but actually it was really effective because it allowed people to laugh about the fuzziness of the strategy, and their egos were attached to this strategy, right? So I kind of needed to find a sideways method of showing that it kind of wasn't making sense. So when you craft and collect stories, how do you recall something like that on command? Well, you need to embed your brain every day in communication, right? You have to think about stories, you have to think about your headlines, how you're expressing things, how you're summarizing them, using metaphors to explain things. And over time, with practice, these moments will jump out to you. Okay, just before I leave you, I'm running workshops about all this stuff. We had a lot of fun yesterday. Do get in touch if you think you want to have a greater strategic influence on your organization. Also, I have a book with me today which covers a lot of the stuff that I teach. It's 55% off roughly the normal price on Amazon India. So do come find me. I'll be over there in the next break, or at the end I'll be doing a signing if you're interested in the book. So, always be creating clarity. I'm really losing the battle with this clicker now. Arnold Schwarzenegger said this: whenever I finished filming a movie, I felt my job was only half done. Every film had to be nurtured in the It's like 20 seconds after me. I don't know what's going on. Every movie needed nurturing in the marketplace. You can have the greatest movie in the world, but if you don't get out there, if people don't know about it, you have nothing. So my message to you today, why you should always be creating clarity for people, is that you should never underestimate the importance of selling your work. Thank you, DesignUp.